This episode of RealAg Radio is brought to you by Ag Expert. Go from field to farm with Canada's most trusted, most secure farm management software. Ag Expert keeps you on top of it all, no matter where you are. Get started for free at agexpert.ca.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Hey, thanks so much for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your day. Also, a big shout out to everybody else out there listening on the RealAg Radio podcast. Well, it's Friday, which means we've got a RealAg Issues Panel. Lindsay Smith is off this week, so we're going to have Kelvin Heppner as per usual. And we'll also be joined by Tyler McCann. He is Managing Director at CAPI. So he'll have a lot of policy perspective here today, so looking forward to it. We're also going to have a beef market update with Anne Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange, find out what's happening this week in the beef markets because we are in prime grilling season. Yes, fire up the grill. Let's cook some meat. And also crack a cold one. Those two things go very hand in hand. It is Memorial Day long weekend, so this is such a fun time of the year because we're just coming off the May long weekend in Canada. Right adjacent to it, this weekend is Memorial Day, and I'm looking forward to being down in Missoula, Montana. I'm going to be at a baseball tournament, so looking forward to that with my youngest son. And it's going to be great, and it'll be probably be some fireworks. Yeah, there'll be some fireworks, I'm sure, because Americans love fireworks, and definitely some grilling and some baseball and a few Michelob Ultras and stuff like that. So I'm looking forward to this weekend. If you have any feedback on today's show, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all the different social media platforms. You can also call that RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Let's not waste any more time. Let's get to it. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're talking beef markets with Anne Wasko right after this.
We have the financial tool you're looking for. An advance payments program, Cash Advance from CCGA, is a low-cost farm financial tool that can help cover your spring working capital needs. Borrow your first $350,000 interest-free, with the rest at prime less 0.75%. Apply on over 50 commodities. Call our experienced team or visit ccga.ca. Cash advances are made under the Government of Canada's Advance Payments Program.
How's your seed quality? What should you treat with? What about herbicide carryover and environmental concerns? Spring is here, and you've got a lot of things to think about in regards to your pulse crop. The Pulse School on Real Agriculture has information and advice for all these questions and more to help you navigate this season. Brought to you by BASF. Pulse School episodes are available at pulseschool.com, realagriculture.com, or as a podcast on your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
Infuse some energy into your next corporate event, customer meeting, or conference with RealAg Radio, Canada's national agriculture radio show. Create a unique experience at your next event with host Shaun Haney, broadcasting RealAg Radio live on Sirius XM, featuring exciting guests, captivating interviews, and the latest news from the agriculture community. Contact advertising at realagriculture.com or call 587-787-1795 to book your on location with RealAg Radio today.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Friday. Let's talk beef markets, and we're joined here for the beef market update by Anne Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange. Anne, how are you doing?
I am great. Good to be here, Shaun.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that we're already at Memorial Day weekend. This is prime grilling season. Like when we think about beef consumption, isn't this like it, isn't it?
Oh, I think, between this and then we got right around the corner, we got Father's Day, another great grilling weekend for both U.S. and Canadian beef consumers. So, we're in the height of it, if you will.
Yeah, nice. So what does that mean for prices here this week?
Well, you know what, Shaun? We talked about the spring high a few weeks ago, but markets haven't gone straight down. And here's a classic example this week where, U.S. cash, I'd call the U.S. South market, Texas, Kansas, $1 higher. They were at 171. In the north, we continue with that big premium in the north. Nebraska trades 182 live this week. That's a couple bucks higher. And then the dressed market in the north, 285 to 286 delivered. That's kind of $3 higher. So, the market shook off the downside we saw back earlier this month, and actually had a pretty good closeout heading into the long weekend for the U.S. And then, on the wholesale market, same kind of thing. The choice cutout last night closed right close to $3 a pound. That's up $1.60 from last week. The select is about $15 back, but we've got production levels still on the smaller side, certainly versus last year. And again, next week with the smaller kill in the U.S., we'll have a smaller production level again next week. So buyers really wanted to make sure they had beef around them, and I think that helped push that cutout up a little bit this past week. So that's been great news. Locally, this Western Canadian fed cattle market just won't say no, which is wonderful. Canfax is calling it $2 to $5 higher this week, anywhere from $3.97 to $4 delivered dressed in Alberta. So that is, again, another all-time high. That'll put the average when they come out later today, probably around $2.38 live in Alberta. And the other piece, Shaun, that I wanted to mention with this local fat cattle market in Alberta, this basis, the spread between local and U.S., has finally clawed its way back to pretty close to par. And, the first 4 months of this year, we averaged 20 under. So the difference there, Shaun, is about, depending on what weight you want to use, about $300 a head improvement.
So we're
from basis.
We're that current then?
Yes.
Okay.
That is the key driver. We got super current finally in these yards, and the front end supply. It wasn't just get current and then into more cattle, get current and then move into tighter supplies. So it's been, but certainly currentness has been the key driver there.
So is the trade in exports combined with domestic consumption pulling that inventory through the system, or what's happening to get us so current?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, our on-feed numbers are finally dropping. All last year, most of last year, we went through record on-feed supplies. So you just had these big numbers, month after month after month, and the packers were killing lots of cattle, lots of beef. And now it's on the flip side. Our on-feed numbers are dropping. Of course, we've been talking about this smaller supply for some time now. And as the on-feed numbers are down, the slaughter's down, our production's down. Fed cattle production in Canada year-to-date's down 7%. From last year. So less production, all those things are allowing, and packers are still making some money. So they want to keep that throughput. And that's what's driving this basis back much closer to the U.S. market than it was all through last year and early this year.
What would we do if the packer wasn't making money? The whole thing would fold on itself. Okay, I'm just kidding. Okay. Big news this week. Canada now has unrestricted access to the Taiwanese market. This is a big deal.
Well, sure it is. Anytime full access to a market that we trade with occurs, I know it's been we talked a lot about the anniversary, the 20-year anniversary of BSE, but these are good wins for the industry. We know I talked to, in our interview last week about, market diversification for trade. So this is another piece of that. So that was announced this week. And Taiwan and Canada have kind of a long on again, off again beef trade relationship, going back to the closure, full closure back in 2003 with the first BSE case, then a reopening to UTM in 2007, then closed again in 2015 when there was another case, or one of the cases, and then opened again in 2016 to UTM and some offals. So this is, like I say, on again, off again. But I understand full access, likely within a couple of weeks, we should be seeing some beef potentially moving, which is wonderful. The Eastern Asian markets are hugely important, whether we're talking about, Japan or South Korea or Vietnam, and now we can add Taiwan to that list. That's huge for Canadian beef. It's a strong market for us, and this is only good news for sure.
Yeah, you think about it, 20 years to get back to normal. That's wow. Yeah.
Long time.
Now, here's one thing that I've been looking at this week. So Canada has an atypical case of BSE. Was it last December? Mm-hmm. No, it'd be over a year ago.
A year.
Yeah. We're like a year and a half. What am I talking about? A year and a half ago.
Yeah.
The U.S. had an atypical case last week. Different reactions from trading partners to an atypical case of BSE. Canada definitely seems getting the worse end of the stick from some partners. Fair?
Yeah, I think it's fair. And one of the key differences between our two countries is just, how dependent Canada is on trade. And so it does become a real issue when you start to get these hiccups and challenges along the way. So, it's not the same. I guess that's as simple as a way to put it. Yeah.
Well, it didn't see China delisting U.S. packing plants.
No. Right? And my understanding, Shaun, and maybe a chat with CCA would be up for this, but I understand that part is still crickets in terms of beef movement to China.
Yeah, from a Canadian perspective, we heard from the Canadian Pork Council that those plants in the pork sector have been relisted. So Canada is now shipping pork to China again. They said when we talked to them last week. Interesting enough, Anne, a lot of discussions right now about some of the struggles of the pork business. And I know we're here to talk about the beef markets, but what's happening in the cattle sector right now for producers is different than what's happening to producers. Like we talked to Rabobank this week, $50 US losses for producers right now per head. That's substantial. So what's the difference?
Well, I think it goes back, and I think you've talked about this in your interview, talked about it as well this week, the supply, right? So U.S. beef production so far this year is down 5%. So is Canada's. So this is that supply story. And at the same time, you've got U.S. pork production up from last year. So lots of supply. It appears like there's lots of supply for some time, as I understand, and a little bit struggling on the export front for U.S. pork export. So all of those things have meant more pork staying in the U.S. and certainly helping to weigh on that market.
Yeah. Well, you have yourself a great grilling weekend, because I know you will be. So Go for it.
Good. And Shaun, we didn't even talk about rain. There's certain parts of southern Saskatchewan and I see southern Alberta getting some moisture. So it's a good thing. I see green where I'm at today, which makes me pretty happy going into this long U.S. weekend. We
just need it to keep on coming, right? Because we don't have those deep reserves of moisture in a lot of these parts. So we need it to keep on coming. It's buying us some time. It's a little bit more encouraging, but definitely not out of the woods yet, so to speak. So, yeah. And have yourself a great weekend, and we'll chat with you again in 2 weeks.
Okay, thanks, Shaun. You too.
We'll be right back on RealAg Radio with the RealAg Issues Panel. Tyler McCann and Kelvin Heppner standing by. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147.
Did you know that Pioneer now has a full lineup of Enlist E3 soybeans? Take a look at Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans for the highest yield potential and for the best agronomic package and herbicide trait options. From the lab to the field, Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans are the best in beans, period. Ask your local Pioneer representative about Enlist E3 beans.
As you head out into the field this season, The Corn School's got you covered. Everything from tillage discussions, weed control info, field trial results, yield strategies, and more. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast from your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
Want to get the best out of your soybean crops? Whether you've been growing them for a generation or are just starting into soybeans, find what you need to know at soybeanschool.com. You'll see videos on growing tips, pest control, and much more from specialists across the region, all in one place. Easy for you to access from your desktop, tablet, or mobile phone. Maximize your yields by staying up to date with the Soybean School, presented by BASF, Pride Seeds, and Syngenta Canada.
Hey, are you looking to simplify your sulfur solution on your farm? Get Biosul Premium Plus from GFL Ag, the unique combination of compost and elemental sulfur that provides a cost-efficient, logistically friendly, agronomically sound, long-term, and environmentally friendly sulfur solution for your farm. Learn more at gflagra.com. That's gflagri.com. Let's get into the RealAg Issues Panel here on this Friday. Of course, Lindsay Smith is out this week, so we filled the roster with Tyler McCann. He is the Managing Director of the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute, better known as CAPI. Tyler, welcome to the show.
Hi, Shaun. Great to be able to still bring the voice of the Ottawa Valley to you today in the absence of Lindsay.
Good. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Well, so I can't ask you about sheep. How was your week?
Oh, we have goats. We have goats, but also not too far off. We're luckily, I think we're past the days of frost warnings. Finally, in the Ottawa Valley, it's taken a little bit longer for those to go away, but it's things have been good. Sunshine and warm weather coming this weekend.
Nice. Summer is. Hey, it's Memorial Day week. This is kind of we were just talking to Anne Wasko, the beef market update. And we're talking about how this is like prime grilling season. We had the Canadian long weekend last weekend, Memorial Day this weekend, and then we move into, of course, Father's Day. So there'll be lots of grilling happening as the weather has definitely warmed up for sure. Also joining us is Kelvin Heppner, coming out of Altona, Manitoba. Hey, Kelvin, how are you?
Doing well. We don't have frost warnings here. We have heat warnings in effect here in Manitoba the last couple of days. So it's nice and warm, and we're going to be hoping for some rain shortly.
Okay, what's not hot is our Blue Jays. What the heck is going on?
Yeah, there's a lot of question marks. This is the team that was supposed to get over 100 wins, and led by their starting pitcher, who is in the bottom of the rankings in a lot of different categories. Alec Manoah needs to find his pitch, but a lot of question marks.
He has no idea where his slider is going. That was his pitch last year. He dominated last year because of that slider. This year, he virtually has no idea where it's going. It almost feels like he has the yips.
It does seem like it's a confidence issue, or it's a mental issue more than a physical issue. But I don't know how you turn that around in the middle of the season without sending him to the bullpen or maybe even to the minors.
Okay, well, there still is time. Early, there's over 100 games left, everybody, before you start to panic. I know, Kelvin, this is familiar.
That AL East is tough, and they have dug themselves quite a hole already.
They have. But boy, the Toronto fan, dude, I know how you feel during hockey season now. Toronto fan has issues. They go negative, like up and down on a daily basis. Like if the Blue Jays put together 3 wins, we're planning a parade. If we lose 3 games, we're trade everybody. Like it's quite the town, man. Quite the town.
Don't put everybody in the same group, though. Yeah. Don't lump everybody together. Sorry.
What's that, Tyler?
I was just going to say that's why Lindsay and I think we both also share this thing where when we hear talk of Blue Jays, we think about birds, not baseball. So it's easier just to leave that to you guys.
There you go. Okay, and some people are like in Nebraska, like Creighton Blue Jays. There's another Blue Jays team too, Creighton. Okay, let's get to some of the topics. I think the biggest is an agricultural factor, but kind of the big news story of the week was I guess we're not going to have a public inquiry, Kelvin, when it comes to Chinese election interference in Canada. What do you make of that?
I think this result took a lot of people by surprise, as the former Governor General David Johnston had been appointed as the special rapporteur by the Prime Minister to look at whether a public inquiry was needed into all the reports and stuff that's been in the media, mainly in Global News and the Globe and Mail, stuff that they've dug up regarding Chinese interference in Canadian elections, particularly the last federal election, and the former Governor General came out this week with his report saying, no, I don't think a public inquiry is needed because what we can divulge publicly wouldn't be satisfactory. And I don't think that this satisfies a lot of Canadians' expectations when it comes to transparency and just filling that trust factor. This doesn't help with trust in the federal government.
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of enjoyed Andrew Coyne, his analysis of it, where it was like, essentially you had Johnston saying, trust me. You had Pierre Poilievre sort of going into a bit of an exaggeration mode with the ski buddy thing. It just was disappointing all around, and it was kind of Canada really being Canada when it comes to this topic. Tyler, what was your reaction to what we saw this week?
It does seem like pretty well everybody except for the members of the Liberal caucus and David Johnston think that there should be a public inquiry. So I think a lot of people were caught off guard when he said no. I think a lot of people see this as a political issue, but I actually think if you look at what he said in his report, what it points to is the fact that government's pretty well broken. Like it's amazing when you hear about kind of how intelligence is shared inside government. Ultimately, there should be ministerial accountability. Ultimately, ministers need to be responsible for getting the information. And again, if the system's not working right, fixing it. That clearly doesn't seem to be happening. But this is there's a lot of, I don't know if rot is the right word, but government in Canada seems to be broken. I think this is just the latest in a long list. If you read Matt Gurney on the line, he's got a Substack. He says it really breaks down kind of how the government just again isn't functioning the way that we would expect, the way we should expect a government to function. So this China interference report did that on a high level. On so many little levels, Shaun, it seems to come up lately that government just can't get things done anymore the way that it used to. And I think that these do speak to bigger issues that really need to be looked at. And the average Canadian may not care, but we should all be expecting and demanding more from our governments.
So here's my concern. And we should be concerned about Chinese interference, Russian interference. These things are well documented in other countries around the world and discussed. Kelvin, we are not far from the next election because of the way that we have treated this situation and sort of the sloughing off and saying, trust me, don't worry. We are not far from when the Conservatives lose. If the Conservatives lose in the next election, saying there was election interference, the result is not fair. This was, we were robbed. A la what we've seen in the United States. Is that a grave concern?
Yes, that's a scary situation. And hopefully we don't go down that path. But this is, again, a case of where trust in government and trust in institutions, why it's important and why it's a slippery slope in terms of politicians trading that trust for their short-term political gain. And that's where opening the books and being transparent and showing what happened and holding people accountable, ministers accountable, not just for not obeying the PMO's orders, but for actually not fulfilling their mandates to the Canadian public and to Canadian taxpayers. That's where we need to see some more of that to rebuild or to at least stop the degrading of trust in government, I would say.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Shaun, I think that there's two important realities that people do need to remember, right? So I think it is now widely accepted that there was Chinese foreign interference in our last election. I don't think anybody disputes that. Johnston's report confirms that. But also, no one disputes that the last election the results were fair and legitimate. And so, anybody that does try and make this out to be a bigger deal, I think does need to accept that the consensus is, and we've heard this from everybody, including Aaron O'Toole and his campaign manager the last time, the Chinese interference that did not happen to the scale to impact our last election. And I think we do really need to remind people of the integrity of our election system that exists today. We need to do more to protect it, but we do have a strong system, a stronger system than they have in the United States.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And there also needs to be proper channels for CSIS spies or intelligence staff, whatever their appropriate job titles are, for them to be whistleblowers and raise these issues without going to Bob Fife at the Globe and Mail, because the integrity of our intelligence agencies is also on the line here too.
Could you imagine being Bob Fife's assistant and some of the calls that come in and trying to filter through some of the what's true and what's spin and what's like? It would be fascinating for him and Steve to be on him and Stephen Chase's desk.
Well, Johnston takes quite a shot at the media in his report, and I think probably spends too much time talking about what the media got right or wrong, and not enough time talking about what's working and what's not inside government. Yeah. But again, Johnston makes this point that they don't have the full context, but of course they don't, right? They're dealing with the information that they do get. They're doing what they need to do as the media to hold the government to account based on the information that they have, and it's up to the government to explain and respond and correct the record. And again, a public inquiry would have done that and would have gone further than Johnston has to date.
Yeah. Okay. Kelvin, quickly, Ford has backtracked on their decision to remove AM radio from some of their new models of vehicles. This is being considered a big-time win. Definitely covered more so in the U.S. than in Canada, but I think the impacts are the same. Rural areas, very excited they will still have AM radio.
Yeah, this is a rural-urban issue, and like you said, it's certainly had more attention in the U.S. as U.S. legislators, a bipartisan group of lawmakers, introduced a bill last week or the week before calling for the maintaining of AM broadcast radio and its role in emergency alerts in vehicles. And so Ford, the CEO, Jim Farley, this week announced that they are backing off on their decision to release new vehicles that don't have AM radios. Of course, in the future, that decision could be changed again. And there are other automakers that haven't made this same promise that are also going away from AM. There are some technical issues around electric vehicles and AM reception. So I'm curious when they say that they're going to update the software on some vehicles that have been sold without AM radios so that they receive it, whether that's actually an AM radio signal or whether that's like a streaming data reliant signal, because anybody who lives in rural areas in the US or in Canada knows there are still areas where you don't have data, you don't have service. And so that is a matter of safety then if you can't hear whether there's a tornado alert or a hurricane or severe weather or different types of situations, that type of alert, that's where AM radio signal travels so far, it's low cost, and all these types of things where it to me, it just makes sense to keep in. This is something that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, but we'll definitely be following as this unfolds.
We got to take a break. When we come back on RealAg Radio, we're going to talk about some of the challenges in the pork sector. Bunge and Viterra are talking about merging as well. We got some big news on we're going to get the reaction from the panel when it comes to the opening up of trade to Canadian beef into Taiwan. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio, here for the RealAg Issues Panel. This segment's brought to you by Granubor from U.S. Borax. Ask for it by name. Go to borax.com. That is U.S. borax. We've got a great panel here today. Lots of stuff to get through and discuss here. We're going to speed up a little bit. We've got Tyler McCann, the Managing Director with the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute, better known as CAPI, as well as Kelvin Heppner out of Altona, Manitoba of Real-Agriculture. Kelvin, news broke yesterday. I would say fairly big merger news. Talk of Bunge and Viterra becoming partners or merging or one acquiring the other. I guess the jury's still kind of out. What was your reaction to that news?
Yeah, it's quite significant. Two of the major players, especially in Western Canada and Canadian agriculture, Viterra and Bunge, both have a significant presence, at least here in southern Manitoba, where we farm. And again, like you said, not a lot of details in terms of who is actually buying who or what the merger structure could look like. There have been talks in the past, rumors around these companies. Of course, Viterra just bought Gavilon in the U.S., and in the past, Bunge has also expressed interest in Gavilon. So we'll see what kind of follow through there is on these reports. Whether there is actually a deal to be made here, we don't quite know yet what Viterra, again, Viterra is part of Glencore, but that relationship and connection and structure is all not clear as well. I do think in Canada, from a Canadian lens, there could be issues when it comes to Bunge's share. Bunge owns part of G3, the company that was formed with the privatization of the Canadian Wheat Board, together with SALIC, the Saudi Arabia Investment Corp. And so that's where Bunge owning those G3 elevators across Western Canada, and then Viterra also owning elevators in a lot of the same markets overlapping. That's where I think the Competition Bureau might look to get involved. Here in Manitoba, we also have two main canola crush facilities in this province. One is owned by Viterra, one is owned by Bunge. And so I think there might be some discussions around that as well when it comes to competition and the regulatory aspects if this deal were to move ahead. Yeah.
Been trying to scour our sources in the grain industry, and one insider had said to me that don't really see this as consolidation, more complementary, which I thought was interesting. I saw another person speculate that Glencore would be interested in trying to move the Viterra assets so that they're trying to also acquire tech resources, right? So that could be part of the play here. Did Viterra acquire Gavilon to make itself more acquirable? As of late, there's a very, very fascinating situation. Tyler, any thoughts on in what we could see here going forward? And is this just the beginning of another? Usually if there's one merger or acquisition like this, there's usually more. But how much room is there in the grain sector for more consolidation?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear somebody refer to it as complementary versus consolidation. I'm not sure. I'm curious to hear what the administration in the U.S. will say or do about it. I mean, they've been very sensitive to consolidation in ag value chains and have wanted to shine a light on it. So looking forward to see what the U.S. administration says and does at the end of the day. I think there's always a debate about consolidation and the role that it plays and whether or not it's a good or bad thing. There's systems in place to prevent it arguably from getting out of control. But you look at the retail landscape in Canada, and a lot of people would say that our Competition Bureau missed lots of opportunities to prevent further consolidation from happening. And I don't think that this is as much of an issue here. It was interesting. A couple of months ago, the Glencore CEO was talking about how he thought that Viterra was an undervalued asset, and he was going to look at ways to get the true value for it. And so, I guess this is what that actually looks like: is that you put it on a sales block or a merger block, whatever the case will be here, and go from there.
Yeah. Well, they were even considering an IPO for Viterra. I read in a Bloomberg story as well. When you think back to big ag mergers, we had this in the news earlier this week, but there's a group of funds that were Bayer shareholders that are now forming a class action suit against Bayer that they really, when they acquired Monsanto, they didn't properly assess the litigation risk. So, some like all of these, sometimes mergers don't go as well as, the CEOs talk about when they talk about, all the synergies and cost savings and service improvements and all those kinds of things, Kelvin.
No, exactly. A lot of this comes down to the value of the shares and people seeing opportunities there. So that's something to watch. And another thing about Bunge and Viterra, these are two of the bigger companies that are hard to get information from. And so it'll be interesting to watch this unfold.
Yeah, I've had a couple emails. Here's what I think. This didn't come from me.
Yeah.
I got a few of those today. Hey, Tyler, we were talking last week a lot about the 20-year anniversary of BSE. And I'm curious, how do you reflect on the BSE crisis?
Yeah, so kind of there are two different phases of my life, right? So I grew up on a beef farm. So certainly I was I was like 17 when the case was. So I certainly have lots of memories, not as involved as, it was amazing listening to Dennis and some of the others talk about the impact on kind of their life for that first couple of years. But when I did get into it was interesting. One of the very strong recollections I have is like a lot of animosity towards the Packers. Again, I think Dennis had talked about it, but there was lots of coverage about kind of where Packer margins went in those days, and I think really built a lot of perception around the Packers were out to get the beef farmers in Canada. And it was interesting when I got into working in politics and working with the entire value chain. You gain more of an appreciation for that was an exceptional circumstance. And Packers may not be the farmer's best friend, but they certainly have an important role to play. But when I worked for the agriculture minister, resolving market access and opening markets back up ended up being a big part of what we worked on. It was a big part of what drove Minister Ritz to keep going. He traveled aggressively in order to get those markets back open, and it really was these were not always big announcements. It was you'd start with your under 30-month boneless access, and you'd push that to bone-in access, and then you try and get the over 30-month access, and it was a long, hard slog. And so I was lucky to be involved in part of that. Clearly changed the way that government works. The Market Access Secretariat was created to try and put more of a focus on these issues. And again, we're just seeing over this week and over the last couple of months that work, 20 years later, still continues to finish opening markets up for Canadian beef around the world.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot, feels the last 10 days about what's going on in the pork industry, which has been really, really interesting. It's really not a good situation right now. We've talked a lot in the last couple of years about ASF concerns. Tyler, it's interesting when you sort of, we have not had to deal with ASF in Canada, but, we should just look to what Canada went through from a BSE perspective, and it should be a lot of motivation to continue our efforts to avoid to have to ever deal with something like ASF on our shores.
And let's be clear, BSE was devastating for the beef industry. ASF will be worse for the pork industry. Especially if it gets into our wild boar population, spreads across the country as it has in Europe. It will have far more severe consequences on an industry that is more export dependent. Like 70% of the pork that we raise in Canada leaves Canada and goes somewhere else. And the trade consequences are far more severe with ASF. And so we've got an industry that will likely be out of markets longer, that is more export dependent. A lot of work is underway to try and make sure that we're prepared for African swine fever. We're probably not doing enough on things like the wild boar population. And I mean, we see it now with avian influenza that's getting to be increasingly endemic. If that happens with wild boars and ASF, I mean, that will absolutely cripple the pork industry in Canada.
Kelvin, why are a group of Atlantic Canada premiers opposing clean fuel regs? There was a bunch of coverage of this week. Basically, is it all about they feel that people in the Maritimes are disadvantaged because of the transportation costs?
Yes, that is a big part of it. And last week we talked about the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report on the distributional costs of of the clean fuel regulations, which are set to take effect here this summer. This is where this is again the policy that is driving demand for renewable diesel and renewable fuels and the canola crush capacity that's being built in Western Canada. But yes, that analysis last week from the Parliamentary Budget Officer, I believe, showed, I don't have it right in front of me, but it showed that households in Atlantic provinces would face among the highest increased costs to fuel as a result of this policy. And some of that has to do with the location of refineries and access to renewable fuels and the costs of meeting these regulations, how they're worded. And so, yeah, these Atlantic premiers have jumped on this opportunity this week, and they had a meeting with Environment and Climate Change Minister Stephen Guilbeault where they brought this up. That's where some of the coverage is coming from. But I'm curious where it's going to head from here. We saw groups like the Canola Growers and Canola Council and biofuel groups lobbying for this policy years ago. It's kind of been set in motion as of a couple of years ago, and now it's finally set to take place. And all these, the premiers and Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative MPs are standing up and saying, hang on, let's not move ahead with this. So now does the government just keep rolling with what the original plans were, or is there a change to the policy? We'll have to see in the coming weeks. There's not a lot of time. I believe July 1st is when this is all set to take effect.
Yeah, Tyler, what's your reaction to the CFR from a policy standpoint? I am constantly confused because we have, the biofuel lobby has been working on this. They are excited, but it's not like a huge lobby in Canada. So it's not, we're not hearing a lot about it in the mainstream. We've got the energy sector that has kind of embraced renewable diesel as an example, instead of, fighting something like they would in the case of ethanol. Farm groups, we've got the Canola Council of Canada very excited about renewable diesel, but you don't hear about farm groups in general speaking out and waving the biofuel flag and the opportunity for demand increases. And Kelvin mentioned the Conservatives have been kind of poo-pooing the CFR because of potential increases to fuel and not focused on how it impacts positively demand for agricultural products. What exactly is going on here?
Well, so I think first and foremost, we need to recognize the role that U.S. renewable diesel and biofuels mandates are playing, right? So I think that one of the reasons you're not seeing as much enthusiasm in Canada, and groups are clearly supportive, farm groups are supportive, but is because the demand is going to come out of the U.S. Mandates, right? That California renewable diesel mandate is going to have more of an impact on demand for canola oil than any mandate in Canada will have. That's just part of that market dynamic that's playing out. I think people look around and they see pretty strong commodity prices. They don't see that same benefit on that they did 15 years ago when there was a big push for our first ethanol and biodiesel mandates. So that takes some of the pressure off. But ultimately, this is a complicated issue, right? You get into kind of what is it doing for what impact is it actually having on commodity markets? I think that's again not as clear as some people make it out to be. It clearly can have a huge impact on emissions. I think people really tell a really positive story about renewable diesel, the impact that it has, let alone aviation fuel. I think it's going to be a long time before we figure out how to make electric airplanes, but they are figuring out how to make airplanes run on renewable diesel that has a much lower carbon footprint. So I think that long-term demand is going to be there. Clearly an opportunity for Canada to do more of that processing, more of that value added here in the country. And again, I think all of those things are probably going to happen regardless of the clean fuel regulations in Canada, but that domestic market would have its benefits too.
We got to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about this new water agency that's going to be based in Winnipeg and what does it mean potentially for agriculture. We got one group speaking out positively about it. What does the panel think about where this heads? You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. I get to spend every day talking to farmers in the ag industry through RealAgriculture.com and RealAg Radio. But nothing is more fun than speaking to an audience live and in person. If you're planning an ag event, book a Real Agriculture speaker to make it a successful and memorable experience. Email shaney@realagriculture.com and you can book myself or any other Real Ag personality to speak at your event. Bring your audience all the fun, insight, and energy of Real Agriculture.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Friday. We got the RealAg Issues Panel, Tyler McCann of CAPI and Kelvin Heppner of Real Agriculture. You know, the 2023 BIF Research Symposium and Convention will be held in Calgary, Alberta, July 3rd through the 6th, featuring educational programming and networking opportunities with leaders within the industry. The technical breakout sessions will focus on a range of beef production and genetic improvement topics. To see the schedule and registration information, visit beefimprovement.org/symposium. Okay, that's beefimprovement.org/symposium. Check it out. Okay, let's get into the final segment here, guys. Kelvin, we're going to have this new Canadian Water Agency. I believe it's based in Winnipeg. When I hear Canadian Water Agency, it sounds very soft. It sounds very nice. Are we going to have a whole bunch of water issues and fights in agriculture with the government like we see in the U.S. with EPA and WOTUS and what's a slough and what is a navigable waterway, all that kind of stuff? Is that where we're headed here?
I think that's a legitimate concern when it comes to this new Canadian Water Agency. Prime Minister was in Winnipeg this week, like you said, announcing officially. This had been rumored or kind of been shared quietly for, I believe, maybe over a year already, that this agency would be located in Winnipeg. But he was at the Forks where the Assiniboine and Red Rivers meet this week, announcing that it'll officially be located there. And it's supposed to be a centralized platform for gathering information, research, data on freshwater in water resource management across Canada. So yeah, I do think there is a concern that this is going to add another layer. You talked about water being controversial, like in the U.S. Well, I think water's already right there at or near the top of the list of things that we can fight about in agriculture in Canada already. And to add another layer of government here, especially because the federal government's jurisdiction when it comes to water is mainly related to fisheries and federal, where water meets federal boundaries and things like that. That's where I think there is some concern. But at the same time, we saw the Canada Grains Council take a positive approach or response to the creation this week, saying that accurate water data is important for our regulatory framework and all those types of things. So there could be some positives in terms of having a better understanding and more strategic approach to freshwater use in Canada, which of course is important for farming. Yeah,
but like anything, so I can support a Canadian Water Agency. It sounds great. I think, Tyler, the question is how we use the tool. Right? That's the thing that is still really left unanswered.
That's right. And so we've got some sense, again, as Kelvin talks about, that it is going to look at water quality, water safety. Again, I think the Grains Council is right. Like, we need better water monitoring data. I think that would resolve a lot of uncertainty out there. And so if you've got a federal agency that's taking a proactive approach, that's got kind of an open engagement, that's working with the industry, working with the value chain, working with farmers, working with provincial governments, there's a lot of good can come from that. But it's always interesting. I think, PFRA has been mentioned as part of this. I think some people have, fond memories of that. But on the flip side, I think people also have memories of government inspectors coming and saying, look, you can't do anything to water on your farm because it's part of a navigable waterway that nobody's ever seen a canoe go down. So I think it's really, we need to see yet where that's going to land and where that kind of will fall. But I think the federal government wants this to be a positive tool, wants this to be about protecting and supporting and promoting rather than enforcing. But ultimately, we're still a long way from knowing what exactly it's going to look like.
And enforcing, Tyler, federal government doesn't really have jurisdiction in a lot of the water enforcement type of areas, right?
That's right. Again, it's up to the province, but we saw the issue in Saskatchewan where the federal government was working with the provincial government on some enforcement issues, had inspectors out there, and some lines get blurred sometimes. And again, you get into some of these boundary issues where water's crossing from one province to the other. You get into some water quality issues where the federal government can have more of a role. I think that there is some opportunity. But you look around the world, I mean, especially look at the United States, what's happened there over the last couple of weeks. It highlights the need to be more strategic in how we manage water. We take water for granted in Canada. We have a lot of it. We waste more of it than pretty well any other country in the world, but we have a lot of it. That isn't a strategic asset for Canada. That's a strategic asset for Canadian agriculture. If you look at all the investment in irrigation that's happening across the prairies, this is a great tool that we have. We need to be more strategic so we avoid some of the issues that the Americans have run into. And hopefully the Canada Water Agency is a tool in that, getting to that strategic direction.
Yeah, well, I think about Lake Koocanusa in British Columbia, where it's, rather large lake where the Canada-US border goes right through the middle of the lake and actually fills from the US side. And locals talk there a lot about how, there's an example of like a big battle that will, when those agreements expire and how that works and all of those kinds of things. A lot of people speculate that some of the next big, huge battles when it comes to neighboring countries is big, huge fights over water as water becomes more of a scarce resource. Just look at, we talked about this earlier this week, the big agreement with some of the neighboring states that has to do with the Colorado River. There is more people that rely on water to that Colorado River. I think it's 40 million people in the U.S. That's more than the population of Canada. They're worried about the supply of water from that river because of some of the drought that has happened. So, yeah, it's access to water is a real thing. Hey, Tyler, before we wrap up here, what are some of the things that Cappy's working on right now?
So we do have a project this year on water. So stay tuned for more news on that this fall, because we do really think that water actually is an important strategic issue that we don't talk enough about in Canadian agriculture. We've got a webinar report coming out next week on federal provincial relations and sustainability. So hopefully that'll be interesting. People don't appreciate, I don't think, the role that the governments working together plays on these issues. And we've got something coming out on land use that will touch on some of the things that we talked about earlier and some of your discussion last week around what's happening in Ontario. So we've got some pretty timely things. And so people should go to our website. It's www.capi-icpa.ca to find out more.
Nice. Good promo. I like it. Kelvin, what do you got planned for the weekend? You grilling this weekend, or what are you doing?
Probably have the barbecue out at some point, and then of course it's softball season for the girls. So we have a softball tournament we're headed to tomorrow, and Shaun, I have one last question for you: Premier Smith or Premier Notley on Monday night?
So I maintain my position that I think, and the polls are not saying this, but I think Smith wins by a bigger margin than what the polls are indicating. And I think it comes down to, obviously, the city of Calgary. So that's my prediction. We'll see what happens. Either of you two have any big predictions on that one?
It's hard to say. I think that makes sense. I think the UCP returns, but it sure seems like it's close.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tyler.
I was going to say, I'm not sure. I think it's a bigger margin. Again, there's some polls out today that seem to be debating about what it's going to look like. So, maybe I think it'll be a surprise one way or the other.
Yeah. And you know what, if Smith wins, honestly, and if Jason Kenney maybe left her a note in her desk, which is kind of that presidential tradition, is watch her back. Her biggest challenge is not beating Notley. Her biggest challenge is
corralling her caucus.
Yeah, exactly. Let's be honest. Okay, if you have any feedback on today's show, maybe you have a prediction in the Alberta election or anything we discussed this week, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or of course you can find us across all the different social media platforms. You can also call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Thanks everybody for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. Have yourself a great weekend, and we'll chat again on Monday. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this episode of RealAg Radio, brought to you by Ag Expert. Go from field to farm with Canada's most trusted, most secure farm management software. Ag Expert keeps you on top of it all, no matter where you are. Get started for free at agexpert.ca.